Building an MVP essentially comes down to 4 steps. This is the strategy we used to use when I worked at IBM, and I've also built MVPs at other places that are both smaller in size as well as large financial institutions. So when we're building a business intelligence solution, there's going to be a lot of noise. We're also going to have a lot of data. There are all these competing business priorities. So we have to figure out how we're going to focus on the most impactful business question. What are those things that's going to drive the business forward? So we have to get super narrow focused, and that might start with like 10 different business questions that we want answered. But we have to figure out how we're going to focus on that. We want to take those questions, and then we also want to make it so it's actionable at the end. So we can answer the so what. This way, we're just not going to be looking at our data. We can turn that data into information and do something with that information. The next thing we have to do is we got to go get the data. And I've been on both sides of the coin where sometimes some companies have so much data and they don't know how to make sense of it or where to start. And then on the other hand, there are companies who have all these questions, but they don't fully know where that data is or how to get that data. I personally like to build a prototype before I build my MVP. This way we can figure out what kind of data we have and what data we might still need to get before we can build this MVP, and is it even worth starting a whole project. So now for the prototype, you can get some sample data from spreadsheets, APIs, and any of the source systems that might have that data. At this point, we want to see what that question was that we defined in the previous step, and then start using that data to figure out how we can answer those questions with calculations. And if we need to transform the data, you want to go ahead and transform that data now and start putting it into your prototype. And that could be anything like Excel or Google Sheets. Figure out some of your key summary points and key visualizations that helps answer that question. And then finally take that data that you've transformed and did additional calculations and summary on top of, put that into your reports in Excel or Google Sheets or whatever tool you're using. Now we're going to go ahead and move to the prototype stage. In the prototype stage, we want to start assembling that dashboard feel that we want to have. You might have high-level summary reports and detailed reports underneath that to answer a business question. So start putting your prototype together. We're not going to be spending a lot of resources here, so that's why we're not investing any tools at this moment. We're just trying to use the tools we have on hand and figure out if we can answer the business question with the data we have on hand. So we're trying to validate our approach here. During this validation phase, we're also figuring out if the data that we did the calculations and transformation on answered those questions and if it's meeting those business needs. If it's not, we need to go back to our data sources and figure out, do we have all the data that we need? Do we need to work with any additional stakeholders to get the additional data? And how can we refine our system to make sure we get everything we need for this prototype? Now, before we go into building an MVP, I like to take my prototype and work with my stakeholders. So that might be the business owner, the executives, whoever is going to be using this data to make those informed decisions. I like to work with them and make sure that it's going to answer their needs. At this point, we should have figured out where our data sources are coming from. That's already been identified because of the prototype, what kind of calculations we need to put in place, and that's been figured out, and what kind of visualizations we want to have, and also what level of summary we want to have. So we have all this stuff figured out, and that prototype works really well for our requirements. Now we're ready to dive a little bit more technical into how we're going to be building the solution. And what kind of tools you end up using to build this will vary based on what kind of technical skill sets you have and what kind of budget your company has. So at this stage, we'll connect our data sources to our business intelligence tool. We'll bring in the data and we'll start working with the core functionality. So I like to just at this point take what I've built in the prototype and replicate this into my business intelligence tool. So an example of this might be that you might have built your prototype in Excel. What I've used in the past has been Excel with Power Query and Power Pivot. So I've built my dashboard in there. And now when it's time to build it into this business intelligence tool, I'm just going to be replicating what I've already built in another tool in a much faster way. So now I know exactly what I need to build, and I'll start building that into the tool, and I'll focus on the functionality that the users might need, which might be the different types of views that they might want, the different way the data needs to be displayed, but also what kind of filters I want to put in place, what kind of sorting I need to put in place if it is tabular data. Do I need to have an export feature? And what kind of access controls I need to put in place to make sure the data only stays within the team and the users that should have access to it. And this is where one of the key differences between a prototype and a proper business intelligence tool is going to come into play, because a prototype is not going to be scalable. You can't really refresh the data easily in it. Things are going to break, the transformations are going to break, it could be very, very slow. So this is when we need to make sure we pick a tool that is scalable with our data volume and the visualizations and the analysis that we're going to be needing. And remember, one of the core ideas behind an MVP is to get that feedback as fast as possible while actually delivering business value upfront. In the MVP stage, we're ideally picking a tool we're going to be sticking with for the long term, where we're going to keep building on top of this. We're not going to be building a new dashboard every single time. For a lot of companies who are not ready to build an MVP yet, there's a lot of ways you can still automate your data and reporting. So I have another video where I talk about 4 different levels of automation that I've seen and I've put in place, and I will link that in the description below as well. Catch you in this next one.